In November of 1982, Flight 508 took off from Buenos Aires headed for Santiago, and never arrived. No distress signal, no radar anomaly, just silence. The plane was declared lost over the Andes Mountains, presumed crashed, buried under snow, or perhaps obliterated on impact. For 40 years, the families grieved, the incident was archived, and the world moved on. No wreckage was found, no bodies, just a hole in the sky and a list of 142 names etched in grief. Then, in the summer of 2022, a Chilean search and rescue satellite captured something strange. A metallic glint, intact, unmistakable, deep in the Patagonian ice fields. A small expedition was dispatched. What they found stunned the world. The plane was perfectly preserved, doors sealed, cabin untouched, coffee still in cups. But here's the part no one can explain. The flight recorder didn't end in 1982. Its final entry was from March of 1996, and it only got stranger from there. The morning of November 14, 1982, began like any other at Ministro Pistarini International Airport in Buenos Aires. Flight 508 was scheduled for a routine journey to Santiago, Chile, a trip the airline had completed hundreds of times. The plane, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, was well-maintained, and the crew was experienced. Captain Jorge Alvarez had logged over 18,000 hours of flight time, and his co-pilot, Diego Morales, was a rising star within the airline. There was no indication, not even a whisper of what was about to happen. Boarding went smoothly. Among the passengers were tourists, businessmen, students, and an elderly couple traveling to see their first grandchild. A pregnant woman in seat 14C, Maria Beltran, was flying alone for the first time. A nervous teenage boy, Mateo Ruiz, was clenching a worn comic book as his father reassured him gently. At exactly 9:04 a.m., Flight 508 taxied down the runway and lifted into a clear blue sky. For the first 90 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Communications were routine. The cabin crew served drinks. Passengers settled in. Somewhere over the Andes, at cruising altitude, the last recorded radio message came from Captain Alvarez. "We are approaching turbulence over Mendoza, requesting minor deviation to the south." That request was approved. And then nothing. No mayday. No emergency beacon. No descent or sudden drop on radar. Just total and abrupt disappearance. Air traffic control tried again. And again. Hours passed. Panic set in. A formal search and rescue operation was launched within the day, scouring the mountain ranges between Argentina and Chile. Helicopters, military aircraft, mountaineers, all were deployed. For months, dozens of countries collaborated in the effort. Not a single piece of debris was found. No fuel slick, no luggage, no fuselage fragment. It was as if Flight 508 had been erased from the sky. Families were left in emotional limbo. The airline, under immense pressure, finally declared the plane lost with no survivors in February 1983. Memorials were held. Death certificates were issued. But many relatives remained haunted. There had been no closure, no remains, no wreckage, no proof. Some believed the plane had been hijacked and taken to a secret location. Others suspected a military cover-up, especially given Cold War tensions in South America at the time. A few even claimed they'd seen strange lights near the flight path that day, whispers of something unnatural. But no theory stuck. There were no answers. Flight 508 quietly faded into aviation folklore, a tragic ghost story of the sky. Years turned into decades. By 1990, only the most devoted continued to dig. One of them was Rodrigo Beltran, Maria's younger brother. Only 12 when she vanished, Rodrigo grew up consumed by the mystery. He became an aviation journalist, traveling the world to investigate unexplained disappearances. He collected every scrap of data, interviewed dozens of pilots and ATC operators, and made yearly pilgrimages to the Andes. In 1997, he published a controversial theory. According to his analysis, the deviation requested by Captain Alvarez might have led the plane far south, off course by nearly 500 kilometers, toward the desolate, glacial wastelands of Patagonia. This theory was dismissed at the time. That region was remote, uncharted, and inhospitable. How could an entire passenger jet vanish there and remain hidden for decades? But Rodrigo was convinced. He said one day, the ice would reveal the truth. And 25 years later, it did. In May 2022, a Chilean climate research satellite scanning glacier retreat patterns captured an anomalous metallic shape embedded within the ice shelf near Lago del Desierto, a vast, nearly inaccessible area close to the Argentine border. The reflective anomaly was consistent with aircraft material. Initial assessments assumed it was debris from a small mapping drone or military test craft. But when the coordinates were cross-referenced with missing aviation records, an intern at the Chilean Geological Institute made a startling suggestion. The dimensions matched the fuselage of a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. And one had gone missing in 1982, Flight 508. Authorities hesitated. The area was remote and dangerous. But after some pressure from Argentina's Ministry of Transportation, an expedition was approved. The team consisted of glaciologists, rescue experts, and one civilian observer, Rodrigo Beltran. They reached the site after an arduous 8-day hike and helicopter drop. What they found defied logic. There, embedded within the glacial wall, was a fully intact aircraft. The paint was barely faded. The wings were undamaged. The windows were frosted over but unbroken. The tail number, clearly visible, confirmed it. LVOPS, Flight 508. But here was the impossible part. The plane was not destroyed, not crumpled, not buried under tons of snow or rock. It stood upright, resting as if gently placed into the ice, as if it had been preserved in time. Even stranger, the doors were sealed, the emergency exits untriggered. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. It took 3 days to safely cut through the fuselage. What they found inside shook them. The cabin was intact. Overhead bins still closed. Tray tables upright. Coffee cups sat on the armrests, frozen mid-sip. A flight attendant's bag sat beside an empty seat. In the cockpit, the switches were set as if the flight had just been mid-cruise. There were no bodies. None. Not a single trace of human remains. No bones. No blood. No clothing. No sign of panic. Just empty seats and silence. The temperature inside, preserved by decades of permafrost, had kept everything from decay. But there was no evidence of life. Or death. That would have been enough to send shockwaves through the aviation world. But then someone opened the avionics bay and removed the black box. It still worked. And the data it held would unravel everything. Because while Flight 508 vanished in 1982, its final cockpit recording was dated March 11, 1996, 14 years after it disappeared. And that was just the beginning. The flight recorder was rushed to the Argentine Air Safety Board's forensic lab in Buenos Aires under strict security. It had been buried in ice for decades. Yet when engineers connected the unit, the playback was near flawless. No data corruption, no mechanical damage. Just clean, crisp cockpit recordings. The first part of the audio matched what was expected. Routine exchanges between Captain Jorge Alvarez and air traffic control during the early stages of Flight 508. Altitude checks, weather updates, slight turbulence. The last confirmed radio transmission, the request to deviate southward, was logged exactly as historical records noted. But then, the tape continued. After the expected cutoff point where the flight should have disappeared, there was more. Not seconds, not minutes, hours. 12 additional hours of flight time. Engineers, investigators, even seasoned crash analysts sat frozen as the recording played on. Captain Alvarez and his co-pilot Diego Morales could be heard clearly. But their voices, something was off. They sounded tense, confused, like something wasn't adding up mid-flight. A female voice, presumably the head flight attendant, entered the cockpit. Passengers are asking questions. They say the sky looks strange. The captain's reply was calm but clipped. We're stabilizing. Don't alarm them. We'll contact Santiago again. But no one could contact Santiago. The recordings show the crew trying every frequency, ATC, emergency channels, international distress bands. Nothing, just static. They were flying, but had no idea where. One of the most disturbing lines came nearly 5 hours into the recording. "The sun hasn't moved," Captain Alvarez muttered. "It's been high noon for hours." Co-pilot Morales confirmed it. They were flying west. Yet the sun remained in the same position. Bright, white, unnatural. Then came what sounded like mild panic. Alarms. A sudden drop in altitude. Rapid breathing. And then silence for 2 full minutes. When the voices resumed, they were subdued. Hollow. Like the two men had seen something they couldn't explain. At the 8-hour mark, they reported a vast white expanse below. Not land. Not water. Just white. "It's not snow," Alvarez said. "There are no shadows." Then came one of the final entries. "We're not in Chile. We're not anywhere." There was a faint knock. Like something or someone was outside the fuselage. The cockpit mic picked it up again and again. Tap, tap, tap. Then a whisper. Not from the crew. Not from any recognizable voice. It simply said, "They're not coming back." After that, the data ends. No crash. No impact. Just a sudden end to the recording at 13 hours and 19 minutes. The media caught wind of the discovery, and within days, headlines around the world were ablaze. Lost Argentine plane found after 40 years. Mystery deepens. Black box reveals chilling audio from beyond. The families of those on board demanded answers. But there were none. International experts, aviation historians, even physicists were brought in. Some speculated that the aircraft had entered a time anomaly, perhaps a form of gravitational lensing or an undiscovered atmospheric condition. Others leaned toward supernatural explanations. The official statement from the Argentine government was vague. Flight 508 was found in a state of preservation that defies conventional understanding. The data recovered from the black box is currently under investigation by multiple international agencies. We ask the public and media for patience and respect for the families involved. But behind closed doors, panic spread. The logistics of what had occurred were impossible. Planes don't simply fly for 13 hours without refueling. Weather patterns, fuel calculations, and engine diagnostics, all of it was inconsistent with known physics. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Worse still was what happened next. On June 2, 2022, just weeks after the discovery, Rodrigo Beltran received an unmarked envelope at his apartment in Buenos Aires. Inside was a photo, a blurry, low-resolution shot of what appeared to be a man exiting the treeline near Lago del Desierto. The timestamp read, March 14, 1996. The man was wearing what looked like an airline captain's uniform, and although the face was grainy, it looked like Jorge Alvarez. Rodrigo was stunned. He showed the image to forensic experts. Facial recognition software ran comparisons with old employee ID photos. 91% match. But that wasn't possible. Captain Alvarez would have been 63 years old in 1996. The man in the photo looked 40, just like he had in 1982. Rodrigo went public. The image circulated through conspiracy forums, dark web threads, and Reddit pages dedicated to the paranormal. But just as quickly as it emerged, it vanished. Websites hosting the photo were taken down. Accounts deleted. The image itself became nearly impossible to find. Rodrigo claimed he was followed for weeks. Anonymous phone calls. Unmarked cars. One night, his apartment was broken into, but nothing was stolen. Except the original envelope. Then Rodrigo disappeared. On July 9, 2022, his abandoned car was found near the edge of the very glacier where Flight 508 had been discovered. Doors locked. Keys still inside. A notebook was found on the passenger seat. The final entry read, "They weren't flying through time. They were flying through absence. A place that looks like Earth, but isn't." The plane didn't crash. It was taken. Rodrigo has not been seen since. And the investigation closed. By October 2022, the Argentine government officially sealed all further records regarding Flight 508. access denied. Classified for national security purposes. The wreckage was airlifted under military escort to an undisclosed facility. All civilian researchers were removed from the project. The glacier site was declared a restricted zone. Flight 508 was buried again. Not by ice, but by silence. And just when the world began to forget, someone noticed something else. The cockpit clock on Flight 508 had frozen at exactly 3:14 p.m., March 14th, the same date and time as the timestamp on the photo of Captain Alvarez. The implications were staggering. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. Months passed. Most people moved on. The news cycle had shifted. The authorities had buried the evidence, and only the conspiracy fringe remained obsessed with Flight 508. But those closest to the passengers couldn't let go. Too many unanswered questions. Too many contradictions. And for some families, too many signs. Elena Ruiz, mother of 17-year-old Mateo Ruiz, began receiving strange phone calls in September 2022. Each call came at the same time, 9:04 a.m., the exact time Flight 508 had taken off 40 years ago. No one spoke on the other end. Just a faint, low-frequency hum, almost like engine noise. The calls would last exactly 13 minutes and 19 seconds, the same length as the black box recording. At first, she thought it was a prank. But then she started dreaming vivid, haunting dreams of her son, exactly as he looked in 1982. In the dreams, Mateo was standing in the aisle of the plane, looking out the window, whispering, "It's not the sky." She wasn't alone. Dozens of families began reporting the same phenomena. Unmarked letters, sudden static on radios at home, visions, memories that didn't belong to them. One woman claimed her daughter, who had never met her Aunt Maria Beltran, began speaking fluent Spanish in her sleep and describing the interior of an L-1011 cockpit in perfect detail. And then there was the pilot. In early 2023, a Chilean hiker stumbled into a border patrol station near Torres del Paine National Park. Disoriented, dehydrated, and dressed in outdated aviation gear. He claimed to be Captain Jorge Alvarez. He was immediately taken into custody. DNA tests were conducted. Fingerprints analyzed. He was a perfect match. But here's the impossible part: he hadn't aged. Not a wrinkle. Not a gray hair. His body showed no signs of having lived through the past 40 years. Under interrogation, he said very little. He kept repeating the same phrase. "We were above the world. And then we weren't." When pressed, he broke down. "There was a doorway," he whispered. "Not made by us. Not made for us. We weren't supposed to see it." He never spoke again. The following morning, he vanished from the secure hospital ward where he was being held. Surveillance footage showed no one entering or leaving. His bed was empty, window sealed, door locked from the outside. All that remained was a folded note on the pillow. "It's coming back." By now, Flight 508 had become legend, its name whispered alongside the likes of Amelia Earhart and MH370. But there was one last development, one that never made the news. In January 2024, a private weather satellite operated by a Scandinavian tech startup captured high-altitude imagery of the southern hemisphere. One of the frames contained a barely perceptible outline, an aircraft-shaped shadow hovering over the Southern Ocean. Analysis confirmed its dimensions matched the Lockheed L-1011. But it wasn't flying. It was motionless, floating at 45,000 feet. No contrail, no movement, just there, suspended. The image was timestamped 3:14 p.m., March 14th. Again, the startup quietly handed the footage over to the Chilean government. Days later, their entire cloud archive was wiped, company assets frozen, and one of the engineers who had first spotted the anomaly was found dead in his apartment. Official cause: suicide. His computer had been erased, but a single post appeared briefly on a fringe message board under his username. "It's still in the sky, but it's not ours anymore." There are many theories now. Some say Flight 508 crossed into a parallel dimension, one that mirrors ours but not quite. a pocket of timeless air trapped between realities. Others believe it was abducted, lifted by something ancient and intelligent, something that isn't bound by our rules of time or space. And then there are those who think it never left at all, that the wreckage in Patagonia was a decoy, a shell, a message. But a message from who? No one knows. All that remains is the silence and the hum, because even now, decades later, radar operators in Chile, Argentina, and even parts of New Zealand occasionally report strange blips. Objects moving at impossible speeds, then vanishing, no transponder, no response, and always at 3:14 p.m. On the anniversary of March 14, 2025, families of the victims gathered near Lago del Desierto to hold a memorial. It was quiet, reverent, cold winds sweeping across the glacier. Flowers were laid, names read aloud, and then, the sound. A low-frequency vibration filled the air. Phones began recording. Static filled the screens. The sky darkened, not from clouds, but from something vast moving far above, barely visible. A shimmer, a distortion, and then, silence. No one was harmed. No one could explain it, but the consensus was clear. Flight 508 was never lost. It was taken, and for a brief moment it came back. Whether as a warning, a glitch in reality, or something else entirely, we may never know. But one thing is certain: the sky holds more than clouds and stars. Sometimes it holds secrets, and sometimes those secrets fall back to Earth.